with Eaton called Green Grid Smart System, the UK's low carbon energy. My name's Patrick Hall. I'm a Senior Research Fellow at Bright Blue, and I will be chairing today's discussion. Before we get into it, just a little bit of housekeeping. If you do wish to tweet about this event, you can do so using the hashtags BrightBlue and CPC21. And if you wish to tag either Eaton or Bright Blue, our Twitter handles are Eaton Corp and we are Bright Blue. We will first hear some introductory remarks from our panellists, and then we will move to a Q&A. Could I ask that you put your hand up if you want to ask a question, and one of the roaming mics will come to you to speak into the microphone. The purpose being that whilst we're all here in person and we can hear ourselves relatively easily, we do have a digital audience watching through the camera at the back, so if you speak into the microphone, they can also hear your question. So please do wait for the roaming mics. And on that point around a digital audience, I will be receiving questions from our online viewers via my phone, so I'm not being terribly rude by looking at my phone. So brilliant. It's quite a timely panel, this, because many of you would have seen the scoop in the Times this morning that the Prime Minister is going to commit to 100% green energy by 2035. We know that we're going to need more electricity for net zero by 2050 if you think about the changes that we need to make in our lifestyles, driving electric vehicles, heating our homes via heat pumps, even parts of heavy industry such as steel production, for example, using electric arc furnaces. We're going to need a lot more electricity, but we also need green electricity, shifting away from fossil fuels. However, there is of course the intermittency issue, renewable output being low when the sun doesn't shine or the wind doesn't blow. As such, a smart energy system is crucial for balancing our electricity grid. So today we're asking, is the UK a world leader in renewable energy? How attractive is UK energy for foreign investment? What are the economic opportunities associated with the renewable sector? Will large-scale battery storage be needed in a high uptake scenario of renewables? And if so, when are we likely to see that deployed at scale? What can public policy do to make the UK's energy system smarter and more flexible? How can the government support households to shift to low-carbon energy without imposing too much of a financial burden on them? What role will decentralised energy and microgeneration play in the UK's future energy mix? And lastly, how can the government support a greater number of energy prosumers? So here to answer some of those questions and more is our excellent panel. I'll begin by introducing Richard Graham to my left. Richard is the Conservative MP for Gloucester and a member of the Joint Committee on National Security Strategy. To my right is Nina Skorupska. Nina is the Chief Executive at the Association for Renewable Energy and Clean Technologies. She is a board member of TfL and Royal BAM, supporter of UN Women UK, and an advisory board member to National Grid ESO and Carbon Trust. To Richard's left is Siobhan Meikle. Siobhan is the Managing Director of Eaton Corporation. And to Siobhan's left is Peter Foster, and Peter is the Public Policy Editor for the Financial Times, and he was formerly the Europe Editor for the Daily Telegraph and the Sunday Telegraph. So thank you all to our excellent panellists for joining us this morning, and I'm going to hand over to you first, Richard, for your 5-minute introductory remarks.
Fantastic. Well, Patrick, thank you so much. Well done and brilliant. Very kind of Eaton to sponsor this great event. Bright Blue, we're all bright blue, I'm sure, in this room, but we're going to talk about green grid, and like a good student, I'm going to try and answer the exam questions bowled at us by the examiner, who's going to fiddle with his toy in order to distract the speakers. And I'm going to talk, I'm not going to refer to the Joint Committee on National Security Strategy, which is a suitably obscure committee, but I'm going to draw on my role as chair of the Marine Energy All-Party Group, and some of my experience as the PM's trade envoy over the last decade in terms of what's exportable and so on. So, with no further ado, is the UK a world leader in renewable energy? Yes, undoubtedly on offshore wind. We sort of know all about that, don't we? The figures I'm told by the government, who of course always would give me the correct figures, 69,000 jobs by 2026 and 10 billions of something a year. All terrifically exciting, all full steam ahead. And the important thing to remember is, of course, that this started from enormous subsidies, and it's now producing the cheapest energy in the United Kingdom at roughly £39 a megawatt hour. As of the last CFD, the Contract for Difference auction, which we all know all about, no need for hands up on who knows what a CFD is in an audience like this, and maybe even lower when we have the next auction, AR4, in early December. So offshore wind, yes, undoubtedly. Marine energy, we are intellectually the world's leading player in marine energy, and that's largely due to the European Marine Energy Research Centre up in Orkney, not to be confused with the EU, for those who've still got sort of Brexit fixation on their minds. But the point is that actually Europe, lots of European companies and nations do use that to test new technologies. But realistically, it's only delivering around 40 megawatts a year at the moment. I've seen it in action, and these turbines under the water with unbelievably fast tidal streams are very impressive. And there is an exciting connectivity, I think, in the future towards hydrogen. There is also a problem worth noting, which is the business of infrastructure, and the ability for them to export their energy elsewhere in Scotland is limited by the fact that Ofgem really needs to invest in the grid for them to be able to do this effectively. And I think that's a problem that both Ofgem and the government again need to tackle relatively fast. So masses more that could be done on marine energy. We are the global leader on this. We've got the strongest waves and tides, along with Canada and bits of East Nusa Tenggara and Indonesia, which for those who remember their geography and the Wallace Gap and the islands east of Bali, I strongly recommend them for a holiday. But there is all sorts of export opportunity there, which we are pursuing vigorously. Floating offshore is a sort of new-ish sector, which I'm told, of course correctly, that we will be generating £43.6 billion worth of something by 2050 and 29,000 jobs and a gigawatt of energy by 2030. It's all very precise. Let's hope it materializes that way. The opportunities are in what the government tends to refer to nowadays as the Celtic Sea, which I think is all that water roughly between Wales, Scotland and Ireland, and involves a little bit of the southwest of England as well. The key thing really, I think, are the opportunities for floating offshore, particularly on the South Wales coast. Certainly Stephen Crabb is very keen on sort of using Pembroke docks as a hub for floating offshore, and colleagues like Virginia and Anglesey have got all sorts of exciting possibilities there, alongside the Wilfer nuclear power, which I think will become a big thing. So, yeah, floating offshore, I think we could become one of the great world's leaders, and I don't think there's a huge amount of competition at the moment, which leads us on to hydrogen. Now, you will know more about hydrogen than I do, but there's a slight difference between green and blue hydrogen, blue being largely generated by gas, green being sort of renewables. And this, I'm told, will generate 120,000 jobs by 2050. There are all sorts of players already, like ITM Power, generating their electrolyzers from the Sheffield factory, Gigastack in Humber, all sorts of exciting things. And indeed, we're hoping to generate hydrogen from my renewable energy plant in Gloucester, which you can hear much more about at 6 o'clock this evening. There are 2,000 of these recycling centres in the country where we could generate lots of green energy. We're going to do solar, wind, and hydrogen from this one. So come along at 6 p.m. at an alternative venue, I'm afraid, the Conservative Environment Network, but Patrick, opportunities for Bright Blue to play in this space as well. So yes, broadly speaking, we are sort of leading players. I'd say the challenge for us as a nation is why, if you are a major player in hydrogen, a big manufacturer, why would you want to set up in the UK rather than, say, Germany? What are we going to do to attract them? And I don't think we're doing quite enough yet, so my challenge to the government would be, come on, if we're going to be the world leader in this, let's make sure that we can really attract things. Now, I'm in danger of running out of time before finishing this exam. Number two, how attractive is UK energy for the investment market? I think it's not attractive enough, but I also think there's a huge challenge, which I've been giving for the last decade to the investment industry, where once upon a time I used to work. And what I've said to them is, look, where are the retail opportunities for people to be able to invest in renewable energy in their own communities? Solar panels on every primary school, etc., etc. And the answer is these funds don't exist. And the excuse always given was, well, you see, it's all terribly difficult because of the pension regulators' requirements on liquidity, and these things are long-term investments. They can't be done through listed instruments and all the rest of it. Bollocks to that. And I think the government has found a sort of way forward with them, and the rules are being tweaked. So there's hope. So room for improvement on number two. Three, economic opportunities for levelling up. Massive, absolutely massive. And these 2,000 recycling centres, for me, are the beginning of that opportunity. We have 350 acres in the middle of the small city of Gloucester. It's a huge amount of space. and it's had landfill in it for 50 odd years, so the land is totally decontaminated, so no danger of anyone shutting houses there. So what do you use it all for? And that's where the whole business of green energy and an eco park, we're going to plant 120,000 trees, comes in. But the opportunities for green energy are just enormous. Now the problem is, which I think is the next one, is, well, I'm going to jump over question 4 for a moment, but question 5, what can we do in public policy to make it sort of more flexible? Basically, at the moment, if you are a business that wants to generate solar power, you're not going to make really anything at all sort of selling it into the grid. But you will make a bit of money, and the user, the customer, will save a bit of money if you can go direct to business. And what that means, of course, realistically, is that you need to have the businesses within about 1.5 miles of where the energy is being generated in order to get that direct hookup. And I think that there's something in the system that needs to be improved in order to make that energy system smarter and more flexible. Large-scale battery storage, yes, of course, we need all that massively. I just note in passing for those who are sort of strongly anti-China that the big battery operator that's going to joint venture with Nissan in the northeast is Envision, which, of course, is a Chinese subsidiary. And I do think we're going to need to be slightly more supple and flexible in our relationships with some of the world's largest countries if we're going to play a major role in renewables, bearing in mind how key they are on, for example, solar technology and other as well. How can the government support households shift? I don't know is the answer to that, so I'm hoping someone else on the panel can answer question number 6. I think there's got to be some clever stuff. I'm a bit worried about what my excellent researcher Dan was briefing me on earlier, which is the domestic renewable heat incentive, with all sorts of opportunities for ground heat, about which the vast majority of my constituents, probably including me, don't know nearly enough. I do not see how they are going to be really able to decide what technology is best for them through the Clean Heat Grant. The applications and the process seems pretty clunky to me, with somebody coming along to assess things. I think there's a lot more we can do to sort of simplify all that, and I suspect that these things, ground source heat, are much better done with new housing than retrofitted. I suspect it's rather an expensive business, and I can see all sorts of problems in listed homes and all the rest of it. So I'd love somebody else to put me straight on that. Patrick, number 7, decentralized energy, micro-generation, hugely important. I sort of going to take micro-generation slightly wider. I mean, I think the opportunities for small nuclear reactors, for example, are huge and considerable, and Rolls-Royce has done good work on that. So I think we should have masses more of that, and I'm glad the government has woken up to the idea of doing more nuclear in general. But that's not quite micro-energy. Certainly Wilfer won't be. That will be huge energy. Decentralized, yep, love the idea. The Gloucester Solar Co-op, all that sort of thing is all good. We took away the FIT, in my view, a bit too quickly, and now we're sort of trying to replace it using a different brand name, of course. Number 8, and this is the final question, thank the Lord both for me and for all of you. How can the government support a greater number of energy prosumers, which I take to mean a combination of a producer and a consumer? It's an interesting word that was new to me when I read this a couple of hours ago. I like the idea of being a prosumer, but I'm only going to be a prosumer at home, in a very little terraced house with a tiny garden, if I can do something through solar. It seems to me realistically, I can put a charging point in the garage for an electric car, fine, but that's not really generating surplus energy. So I see that opportunity as exciting, but I'd love to understand more about it. And again, I know that there are cleverer people than me on the panel who will be able to give you a much better answer to question number 8. So there, in a nutshell, are my opening suggestions. Not speaking on behalf of the government, please do not take anything that I've said as remotely representing the government's views, but it's representing a simple community MP's point of view, keen to do masses more as a nation, a country, a city, and a community, needing more information, particularly on what can be done at home and what's most practical, because some of these sort of initiatives, what did we have? The Green Homes Grant, that ended in tears. So did the New Labour one, I remember, in 2009. Lots of chaps fiddling around in your attic, spraying a bit of shaving foam around, saying, thanks, government, I'll have 2,000 quid for that. And Granny downstairs having not a clue what had happened and no improvement to her heating bill either. So I do think that on those grassroots issues, we, the government, have to get our act together. Thank you very much indeed.
Thank you very much, Richard. I think you've passed that test. I just wanted to pick up on one of your comments, which was the point around China. And this is a conversation that speaks a bit more widely than to just a greener electricity grid. But we know that China has control of roughly 70% of lithium-ion battery supply chains. But at the moment, our relations with Beijing have been souring. Lots of people, particularly in conservative circles, take quite a hawkish view on China. Are you saying that we should have a more constructive working relationship with China rather than treating them like a foreign hostility?
So I'd be very reluctant, Patrick, to transmogrify this great session on green energy into a discussion on Anglo-Chinese relations. But I was British Trade Commissioner in China 30 years ago, first worked there 41 years ago, chair the All-Party China Group, so I do have a strong view on all of this. And what it boils down to, and let's give it an environmental context, is that when you're dealing with the world's probably joint most important economic power, you need to be able to have dialogue with them on a very wide range of issues. There is absolutely nothing to be gained from not having a dialogue. And it needs to be on a whole level of, a whole number of different levels. And the government calls it an integrated review, challenge, compete, cooperate, and I can't remember the last C, but partner is a reasonable word for it. And so in terms of the environment, it's very strongly in our interest that we work really closely with China. They've already come up with 2 reasonable starting bids for COP26, which we need to ask them a bit more detail on, how they're going to get to peak carbon in 2030. They could probably get there a bit earlier if they really pushed it, and how they're going to get to zero carbon by 2060. But most importantly, of course, is this commitment to no longer financing any coal-fired stations outside China. That is a huge step forward. Alok Sharma has called, for an end to coal energy as one of the major goals of COP26. So this is a huge commitment, and what we can do now is to encourage China to exercise the same responsibility domestically as they're going to exercise in their financing abroad. And lastly on this is the opportunity for the UK. And I just put to you all the reality of what has changed over the last 100 years. When I was a boy growing up in Kenya, we had developed all the infrastructure in that great East African nation. We'd put in the roads, the port, and the railways. 100 and something odd years later, the Chinese have redone all of those things for a modern era. But we are the international center of finance in the world, possibly behind New York. So why haven't we been able to finance this sort of thing? Why have we left it all to the Chinese? And it's the same with green energy. How much money are we actually putting up as a nation to invest in solar energy across Africa, to provide them with the power that they all need? The Middle East, the same. Why are we leaving it all to BRI, the Belt and Road Initiative from China? So the answer is on this one, as they move away from financing coal-powered stations, we should be working really closely with them to joint finance a whole series of projects around the developing world to give them the chance to benefit from renewables in the same way that we are domestically. And if we're involved with them, then we can have a better control to make sure there are none of the sort of ludicrous debt equity swaps that they've been looking at in some countries, and that the whole thing is less political and more practical. So that is why, in my view, it's one of the key reasons why we should have this very close dialogue with China in a way that doesn't undermine our values, does stick up for open societies, but recognizes that is their choice. And our choice should be to keep in a very close dialogue with one of the world's leading players. Thanks.
Thank you, Richard. Okay, we'll hand over now to Nina.
Thank you. Is it the protocol to stand up? Because I thought that
No,
was
no,
very
no, you don't.
inspiring.
You don't have to, but if you would like to, feel free.
Okay. Actually, I will. I'm going to stand up. Okay. So, my name's Nina Skorupska. I'm the Chief Exec of the REA, more recently known in the last 2 years as the Association for Renewable Energy and Clean Technologies. Now, we've been around 20 years, and I would love to say it was just the REA's responsibility, but I can see that I've got some of my members in here and colleagues from people who are champions of renewable energy and clean technology to say we are where we are today because of all the hard work that our members have been doing. So where are we today? Because one of the questions was, are we a world leader in renewable energy? Well, unfortunately we're not, because we are in certain technologies, exactly as you said, but not in everything. So offshore, we're going great guns, and the world looks to the UK on leading on offshore wind. Maybe not so much, as you explained, on marine technologies, which the REA represents. But on all the onshore technologies, we've had fits and stops and starts through the course of the last decade. We've managed, though, with offshore wind and the other areas, to get to around about 43% renewable power, but we're still languishing far behind, as many of you will appreciate from everything that's been in the press recently, on renewable heat, decarbonising heat, and obviously now decarbonising transport. Still way, way behind, well in the single-digit figures for transport in terms of how much renewable transport we deliver. Now, there's a number of things that the REA does, representing its 550 members across power, heat, transport, and circular bioresources, is we produce reports ourselves, and every year we kind of hold up a mirror to the government and say, please look, whichever government's in place, whether it was Labour or Conservative or coalition, and to say, well, how well are we doing in terms of deployment, and how well are we doing in terms of jobs? So just in renewable energy and clean technology, we've got around about 138,000 jobs working in those. So the definition of green gets stretched when you start to include energy efficiency and all the additional areas. But we think, as the REA, in talking with our members, that by 2032 we could deliver 100% renewable power solutions. And that's all written in one of our annual reports. Now, the other report we do is to why isn't it progressing as fast as possible? So we started 2 years ago an Energy Transition Readiness Index. There are quite a few. World Energy Council do one in great depth of all the nations of the world and measure every single item of it. But we were quite straightforward in saying, well, would an investor, would a developer, if they had a choice, in the first report, when we compared 9 leading nations in Europe, would they come to the UK? Would we be rated at the top? Back in 2019, it was rated 8th out of the 9 countries, mainly because of lots of other areas across socio-political support, our ability to take the technologies that we already have today and make them work for us in a cost-effective and affordable way. And then more brutally, it's about the open market and having that transparency of an ability of all the different players to make a difference in those markets. Anyway, 2 years on, I'm really pleased to say, when we've done the report again, and that's what the flyer is on your chair, we got a little bit of a map there, and we decided not to do the where are you out of 9 or out of 12, because we extended it to include 12 countries this time. We thought we'd colour code it and let the ouch factor be a little bit less painful, where you see where the UK comes, because it still isn't in the top grouping at all. It's right in the middle. And in our report, which you can download by looking with your smartphone or your laptop with that QR code, you'll get a copy of everything, which describes how we compared those different countries, what are the reasons for the different countries to be represented in different ways, and against those 3 criteria: socio-political factors, technology factors, and market factors. Now, I've got the UK page open here, as you could guess I would. So we kind of go in around about the 2s and the 3s. Now, there's a score of 4 for both innovation and socio-economic impact, because there's a will and a pull and a promise. And that's the thing that we've got. We've got ambition. The UK is not the only one who's got an ambition to reach net zero by 2050. All the other 9 countries have now made that claim. But it's now about making not only the money available to support, we've got to stop doing pilot and demonstration plants all the time, because we've got so many projects going, it's unbelievable. Our investors now need to see is certainty. They can see what that opportunity is. We believe if we could take advantage and create those transparent markets now, of which energy suppliers, prosumers, the people who consume and produce, whether they're domestic or a business, as well as the needs to give energy security to the grid, those markets, if they're available and the right regulation framework is in place, would see more and more people participating, deploying more renewable power generation, not just solar and wind, but all the other forms, anaerobic digestion, waste to energy, landfill gas generation, all connected systems. If there's a clear market, good regulation, we will see the acceleration. And maybe the UK won't be languishing in the middle lands. It'll be up there with the Scandis. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Nina. Definitely still some way to go then for the UK to make the country a more attractive place for investment in renewables. I'll hand over now to Peter.
Thanks. I will also stand up if that's the done thing.
Seems the way, is it?
Projects energy, Peter.
You know, yeah, I'm low wattage. You know, I come at this actually from the point of view as a journalist, not surprisingly, because I do journalism, and I think one of the things that really strikes you is how undeveloped the conversation is about the future energy transition. So the government constantly congratulates itself on the increase in use in wind power. Brilliant. But most of us flick the switches in our homes, etc. And we don't really know where the energy comes from, and frankly, we don't really care. And the broader conversation about where the next bit of the transition to net zero has gone hasn't even started. It's interesting, or at least it's only just beginning. So it's interesting to see the M25 being blocked in order to protest about people who say we need to decarbonise our homes. An awful lot of people know that their car produces carbon. They don't really think that their gas boiler produces carbon. We're literally only beginning that conversation, and the government is constantly nervous of having the conversation. So there was a decarbonisation strategy from the Department of Transport that came out a month ago. It didn't mention road pricing. How are we going to pay for £40 billion worth of tax that we're not going to get from taxing fossil fuels as a result of driving our car? You know, those are really basic conversations. There was a Green Home grant scheme, which, as Richard says, ended in tears. You cannot begin a conversation if you're not prepared to stick with it and think strategically about how we're going to do the next bit of decarbonisation, which is the hard bit, the consumer-facing bit, the bit's going to have us to get used to having heat pumps in our home, not to having gas boilers. And that brings us to the question of smart grids. And I think we're in a place now where, do you remember that era where we talked about the internet? None of us really quite knew what it was. We talked about email and none of us quite knew what it was. Most of us have got smart meters. You know, Siobhan and I were talking about this before we started. Most of us have got smart meters. Unless you're super energy conscious, you don't really know what it's for, right? You have it ticks away on the window ledge, but you have no sense that it's actually part of a new web that we're all going to have to start thinking about. You know, we have a grid infrastructure that's basically built around old coal and gas-fired generation. There is no conversation about a world where you are a prosumer, where you're either reducing the amount of energy you draw off the grid or you're actually contributing to the grid. Imagine a world where a south-facing house is generating electricity which a north-facing neighbour is using to charge their car. You know, a world where all of the car batteries, when we're all on electric vehicles, are drawing power, storing power, returning power to the grid in a flexible way, where we all think about the time at which we charge our car, where you have you know, flexible use of the grid. You have a smart grid, like you have a smart meter, but it means something, because right now it doesn't. And until you start that conversation, until the government levels with people that actually, you know, the green revolution is not just about millions of new jobs. They always talk about millions of new jobs, and most of them don't arrive in the way that they're promised to arrive. And if you lose people's, you know, trust, really, and you take it as an entirely cakeist operation, we will fail at this transition. And I think one of the problems about our very binary Brexit broken politics is that, you know, frankly, levelling with the public is not the kind of politics that we have at the moment, sadly. We flog fallacious narratives about wage rises and about, Brexit has been incredibly toxic to fact-based conversation about what the future might look like. And I think, this generation of politicians, and it's not just Boris Johnson, it's Donald Trump, populist politics is quite inimical to grown-up conversations, but Lord knows we need to have them, and we haven't really even begun. But there is a world out there where there is real positivity. So it's a shame, I think, that the government has taken out microgeneration from a serious part of the energy pay, because actually microgeneration, if you remove the fiscal distortions that come from putting too much tax on electricity and not enough on gas, and the government is moving towards that, then you start to create local energy cooperatives that can not only contribute to the grid, contribute to local energy, but also start to take this conversation that takes place in rooms like this down into the kind of the street level, into the pub level, because that's where it needs to be, because it's not super complicated. We all know how to use email now. We all understand the internet now in a way that when I started work in 1995, we frankly didn't, right? It was this weird thing that we didn't really understand. And that's what we've got to do. But to get there, we have to get some technical policy incentives aligned. We have to make it easier for green energy to connect to the grid. We have to make it easier and economic for prosumers to contribute to the grid in a way that they're not. We need to produce the right tax incentives to get social investment. In researching for this panel, I've discovered there's a whole Brighton energy cooperative I knew nothing about, which somebody like me might well have been interested in, but knew nothing about because it's so nascent. And so events like this, but newspapers like mine, need to start moving conversations, and the government needs to start grappling with the net zero process in a grown-up way, which it's frankly not really doing at the moment. And it needs to start now, and you can see nascent signs of it starting with the shift on tax away from electricity to gas. But we need to get moving, because this decade is going to be critical, and we're nowhere at the moment.
He's a bit gloomy, isn't he?
Well, thank you, Peter, but there's still some scepticism around smart meters, though, isn't there? Why do you think this is, and what do you think we should be doing to help remedy this?
Because most people, don't know what they're for, right? If people understood what they were for and what they might be useful for in the future, they would understand why they have them. But if you ask most people in the pub, why do you have a smart meter? They'll say, I don't know, the electricity board put it in, right? I mean, people who are super, and I know the price of energy is going up, but most people, I imagine, sitting in this room, don't sit there looking at their energy meter and going, oh, I'm 7% above my average monthly consumption. Quick, go and turn the lights off, right? I mean, some people, but I have been doing a bit of straw polling around this, right? And I'm sure that maybe that's why this is a wrong self-selecting sample. I may be speaking ill of this room, right? That's why you're in this room. But I can tell you, I've been down the pub and I've done that old thing. Most people don't, actually, right? I mean, those people who are super green conscious or super energy conscious perhaps do. But, my kids spend their life lecturing me about green stuff, right? I still can't get them to turn the lights off in their bedroom, right? There's a kind of... And so I do think there is a real education problem, right? None of us really know why we had them. We were just all told we needed them. And so you need to engage people about what a smart grid is and how, in the fullness of time, you might end up not having just coal and gas power stations into the grid, that you actually can use all the information that comes out the smart meters to share the load and spread the load super economically so that we all use electricity. Most people don't understand that at a really basic level. Until they do, they won't get it.
Thank you, Peter. Siobhan?
Yeah, sure, thanks.
Cheer us up.
There's something about going last. You've got to try and weave something in from everything that's been said. So first of all, I start with we are doing a good job, yeah? It reminds me of a school report which said something like, doing a good job, getting results, then there was a but. And it said, with much more focus, could do so much more. So I think that's a bit about where we are in this story. But I think the point I want to make really is there's a lot we can do right now. The tech exists, we can do this today. So yes, there's going to be lots of developments in battery technology, hydro, whatever it might be, and that will take time and that will cost money. But what can we do today? And so I want to talk particularly about the sort of idea of microgrid and the decentralised generation, and wonder why we aren't doing this. Because essentially, we're passionate about microgrids. You know, Eaton, we like electricity, we've been doing it a while, hopefully we understand it and we know what it's about. But we work with a lot of customers, and you know, whether you think about your home, a small business premise, or a data centre, for example, you have potential to make that a microgrid. You just need some solar, potentially some batteries, and away you go. You make it regenerate. And we have lots of examples of where that happens. In Eaton, we have a factory in Puerto Rico where we're doing exactly the same, one of our biggest factories, but we work in a data centre. UK, we have lots of data centres, and that can be a bit of a red rag to a bull, because they're using it, it's all about using lots of electricity, but they can be part of this solution. And we're a little bit behind on here. So when we say, where are we in this? In Ireland, for example, Microsoft and Airgrid are already doing that around their data centres. They've got loads of big batteries, they make them a bit bigger, and then what they don't need, they export back. So that's at one end of the scale. But you can also do this at a home level or a small business premises. You know, this is very scalable depending on the size of what you want to do. So then you sort of think, well, why are we a little bit behind on here? And why aren't we doing more of this? And it brings us some of the points that we've spoken about today. I think there's two really main points. We need to make it pay and we need to make it simple. Because, you know, if you're going to invest some money in this type of thing, you need a return on investment in a suitable time. I spent quite a lot of time trying to navigate this myself. I thought, okay, I better practice what I preach. On the fourth attempt, I gave up at trying to get someone to come to my place and actually come and do the survey and whatever. There was always a reason why not. So I had to go on the online calculator. I can work this out, I know how much electricity I'm using, that's fine. And a bit of storage, a bit of solar, it was looking great, until I realised that after what I'd used, the bit I could export back and monetise was going to give me £54 a year. So at this point, I thought this probably isn't too viable at the moment. The cost of the batteries, which will come down in time, you know, we've seen what we've done with wind and the reduction in cost there, that will come. But also the other part of it, where I think we're a little bit behind, is we don't have this open market. Okay, I could get my storage and make my £54, it goes back up to the grid, and that's it. But we don't really have this aggregator prosumer model that we've heard mentioned today. Now, if you go to the Nordics, for example, they've been doing this a long time. They deregulated the market back in the early 90s, and then they can actually make some real money on it. I was talking to a colleague, I was having an exact conversation about the smart meter, and exactly what you said, I explained that to this person. He looked at me as if I was crazy. He goes, hang on a minute, he got his app, he said, look, and he was telling what he's doing, because he had that half-hour interval in terms of the price. He said, I'm going to sell it at this time, I'm not going to do it that, and they were so on it. And this was because they had this very open market where you can sell left or right, up and down, or whatever it might be. So I think, in summary, I'd say there are lots of opportunities. There are pieces we need to put right. For example, if I'm a business premise, I put that storage in, my business rates go up because it's part of my rate of value. I pay 20% on VAT if I put a battery in, which is crazy when it can be really part of this green solution. So I think, in summary, it does go back to that school report, doing okay, getting results, but with more focus could do very much more.
Thank you very much, Siobhan. We'll open up now for questions from the audience, and we do have the roaming mics, so if you could just wait until they arrive. This gentleman over here.
Thank you. Michael Gibbons, Chairman of Elexon. Elexon does the central systems data management and settlement in the electricity wholesale market, contracts for differences, capacity mechanism. I wanted to comment on the smart meter comments because I think they're very important, and I got a great deal of sympathy for what was said. I'm sure for many people it's a box on the wall which is interesting for a period of time, may or may not have some behavioural context, but by and large nobody's quite sure what it's really for in the long term. But the good news is that there is an answer to that, and the answer, amongst others I'm sure, is market-wide half-hourly settlement, which sounds very techy, but it means that everybody, generators and suppliers, and ultimately consumers, are driven by real financial numbers every half hour. That will cause a number of things. It will certainly cause innovators to be driven by financial investment to innovate. The Ofgem impact assessment suggested that the benefit to consumers was 1.6 to 4 billion over 20 years. My rough calculation says that's 100 million a year, that's 2 million a week. That's really impressive impact. That's what smart meters should be for, amongst other things.
Thank you, Michael. Did you have a question that you wanted to put to a particular speaker?
Well, I guess the question is always in my mind, which follows from the point I just made. You get consumers to behave differently when you have sensible incentives for them to follow.
Absolutely.
Ideally, a financial return on their investment. I can see the return in many cases, but I'm not sure how you get hold of things like heat pumps, which for the time being anyway, don't produce the financial return, at least to a domestic household, that we all want them to have. That's a major challenge and a major cost, and it has to be faced honestly, as the gentleman at the end said.
Thank you, Michael.
Patrick, I don't think there was a question in there, but it was a very useful, brief seminar. And I think that is absolutely right. I mean, if there was a gadget on the wall that allowed all of us to set the hours at which we could charge everything from mobile phones to cars for the period when it's cheapest to do so, which is probably 2 to 3 a.m., I'm guessing, then that would be fantastic. I'm sure we would all do that if we felt we were saving 20 quid a month and all the rest of it. But it ain't there yet, is it?
Peter?
Well, I think we do. It is there. We're doing exactly that. If you've got a car,
Yeah.
I don't think
If you've got a car already, yeah.
Charge it at a time in the evening.
If you've got a car already, but if you haven't, does that gadget exist to charge mobile phones and so on? Not that I know of. That you can preset it for a certain time of the morning, and where you get the benefit on your electricity bill? I don't think so.
Yes,
technology that connects the smart meter to any of the demand devices in domestic premises at the moment.
Thank you.
No.
And it'll take 4
Okay, but if we just
4
elaborate
years.
on this,
4 years. Okay, well there we are.
having signed up for Octopus, I have an agile energy, and that tells me at what time of day my energy is cheaper. And you're right, at 2 o'clock to 3 o'clock in the morning. So of course my car is automatically set to charge at 2 or 3 o'clock in the morning. And I could indeed put all my dishwasher on at 2 or 3 o'clock in the morning, etc. So I do have that option already available from the systems we have. But I do have another question that's unrelated, right? You talked about the Renewable Energy Initiative, right? And I understand that runs out or is being looked again at March next year. And this is the device that allows you to put your heat pump in a subsidised price, if you like, over time. Given the industry is asking for certainty and consistency and we're moving forward, should that be maintained or even increase that value? Because I understand it's going, well, I'm speculating it might be going down.
Well, I'm sorry, but I mean, don't ask me. I've no idea. I'm not the Minister for Energy at Bayes, but I mean, he's the chap to give you the answer to that. But I think the point I was trying to make more generally on all those incentives is that one, as Peter rightly picked up on, I mean, some of these different grants that are sort of available domestically for households haven't been a huge success, whichever government's introduced them. I'm not convinced personally, but I'd love to be if somebody here knows better, that ground sorts retrofit is effective and makes financial sense. And I think the comments earlier suggested it's not really financially viable for individuals at the moment. So I think there are plenty of things in there that are up for grabs. But the domestic renewable heat incentive, I think is that the thing you're referring to? That I think is coming in, or is it being expired in March next year? Okay, so it's being expired. So there'll be something that we replace it with a new and snappier name brand, I'm sure.
Peter, I'm going to come to you in a second, but I'll just let Nina respond to these comments.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. The renewable heat incentive for domestic expired last March. There's another year yet to go for non-domestic. And we had the excitement at the end of summer last year of the Green Homes grant, where we were hoping to see a benefit for at least 600,000 homes to either have the energy efficiency improvements and further energy savings in terms of heat, renewable heat pumps. But unfortunately, I think it's 47,500 installations actually happened during that time, and it was withdrawn. So we're absolutely waiting at the moment for the heat and building strategy to come out. It's imminent. It was supposed to come out before the summer. And in there are all the different types of grants that are being mentioned to support the various deployments that we hope to see all come together under one umbrella, clear and transparent approach. The government has abandoned an incentive, which is a per amount of heat that you've used. It's now moving to a grant. And unfortunately, many of the grants don't quite yet, well, they don't cover the amount, the cost of the different technologies that you want, but they go some way to do it. My last point is, we have to do this. We must decarbonise. This is not an option anymore. So it's about the government working with consumers, people in their homes, me, I've got to do it in my house as well, figuring out what's the best for you to do in your house. Now, what's different about heat, it's quite regional and it's quite local and it's dependent on your house. And finding out what those right solutions are really important. So the first thing you can do, if you do anything in your home, is make sure that they are a signatory, the installer of the Renewable Energy Consumer Code. There are codes out there that make sure that you are not greenwashed and missold technologies that cannot deliver for your home. You know, just like every other sector, there's cowboys. And we work very, very hard to make sure that those cowboys don't undermine what needs to be done. And there's an EV consumer code as well. So make sure your EV charger installer is also a signatory of that code. So all of this is all happening now. And very soon, probably in a year, we'll have one code which covers everything that goes in your house, as well as the person who's trying to make sure that they aggregate all your energy requirements as a service is also under a code too. So watch this space. More to come.
Thank you, Nina. I just want to come back to and give Peter a chance here to respond to Michael's comments regarding smart meters.
Yeah, I think the bit that's sort of missing here is that, you know, the government wants to install 800,000 heat pumps a year by 2028, or is it 600 by 2028, right? So you have these nailed on targets, right? The government is ending the sale of of diesel and combustion engine vehicles from 2030, right? So it's set these front-end targets, and it's done. It's incredibly bad at doing the corollary bit, which is okay. So what follows from that? Because talk about heat pumps. Heat pumps are expensive. They're 4 or 5 times the price of a gas boiler, and they don't deliver the same kind of heat and the same kind of instant hot water than a gas boiler does, right? So you're in a massive sales job here, but there are ways in which the government, if it starts now, can start to sensitise people to where we are going to end up, like it or not, right? You won't be able to buy an electric vehicle. So that means, at a certain time when you sell your house or you rent your house, you're going to have to meet targets, right? So when you remortgage off your fixed rate, right, you're going to have to take either some money out, right, to do what needs to be done, and you're not going to be able to spend it on a new bathroom. You're going to have to spend it now. Governments are allergic.
Incentivized by a mortgage next time you buy a property if it has those green kits in, and that's what the banks are working on now to deliver.
They are, and if we get it wrong at the outset, you'll lose people, right? And the Daily Express and the Daily Telegraph and Nigel Farage and his friends will go, this is all a complete waste of time, right?
They do that anyway.
If you want to have a fact-based conversation about this, right, you've got to get it right, and you've got to be strategic and patient, and you can't. It's a bit like if you were selling a business, if you're selling a product, a car or something, and Mark 1, all the wheels fall off. Don't expect someone to come back and buy the car. Oh no, we got Mark 2, we got that sorted out. It doesn't, that's the that's the kind of the real problem here, is that, you know, they need to work back from their own perfectly laudable targets to say to people, this is where we're going to end up. Once people realise that, because right now you talk to people in Whitehall and they're kind of, all the difficult decisions keep getting ducked, and then you get this thing, well, you know, heat pumps will be super cheap because the price of windmills came down, right? Well, not necessarily. Not unless you do the right things.
I think there was another question here up the front. This gentleman here, I'll take your question and then I will take your question next, sir.
Great, thanks. It's Doug Parr from Greenpeace. I mean, very much following on from that last exchange, the thing that I suspect most people don't get is speed, scale. The speed with which we have to do this, the scale at which we have to operate, not just, well, we need to go further and faster on renewables. We need to go further and faster on the grid, as Siobhan's been explaining. We need to go further and faster on EVs. We need to go further and faster on heat pumps. We need to go further and faster on integrating the system. So, is the current way we operate, which is we have a Whitehall department that is nominally in charge of this stuff. We have an energy regulator that simply looks at networks. He's an economic regulator of networks. He's not a policy regulator, he's an economic network. Is that up to the job? Or do we need something a little more fundamental? And I'm not even starting on the local dynamics of all this, the local dynamics of heat, the local dynamics of distribution grids, the local integration of solar and cars and et cetera, which is another whole basket of issues which will have to change at speed and scale in order to hit these targets, which, as Nina has said, is not really optional because we're up against a scientific barrier, we're not up against a political barrier. So, you know, any reflections that you have on that particular challenge would be welcome.
Thank you, Doug. I'll just take one more question from this gentleman here in the blue suit, and then...
Thank you. I design and develop all sorts of off-grid systems, and I started looking at heat pumps a few years ago, and ludicrously expensive for what they are. You can buy a triple split bi-directional air conditioning unit, 15 kilowatts for about 1,200 quid. You're paying £6,000 for an air-to-water heat pump. So I get some stuff made in China. I found a supplier out there. I'm bringing them in for 1,500 quid. They're not MSCS certified. There's no grants available for them. But when you work it out, it's actually cheaper in the long run. There's no upfront capital cost. So all of our own developments, we're using imports. Do the panel think that the RHI subsidies, grants, are actually distorting the market the same way they did for biomass systems? And actually, we're not letting the market sort this out. And if we want to offer an incentive, offer it on consumption rather than on capital purchase, because otherwise you're getting suppliers, importers, manufacturers, installers just whacking it on because they know that people are going to get the money from a grant.
Thank you. Siobhan, I'll come to you first.
Yeah, thanks for that. So just to pick up on the point about speed and scale, I think this is really the polarising piece at the moment, because there's a wake-up call here all of a sudden. 2030 is not that far away. Now, you might think 2050, what we'll be doing by then, that's another story. But, you know, it's 1 5-year plan away. You know, if the government have to have this on their radar because they want to come back in, it's going to be there. So I think speed and scale is beginning to really figure. A couple of pieces that will really drive this is the EV. Now, we're not very high on our penetration of new registrations in terms of how many are EVs compared to somewhere like the Netherlands or Norway. So we can also learn from other places. We are an island, but we're not on our own here. And as there are other things that we will scale up. But I think the key to this really is, you know, how do we get the private investment in here? Because if we, and linking to the other point there, you know, the government maybe has billions to spend. Private investment has trillions to spend, was the quote today. I think it was from Boris over lunch. So, you know, that's how we've got to make it pay for them, because the deployment, pick up on your piece, you know, this isn't what the government are going to be good at. They're good at policy, and it's fantastic to set that clear vision, because private investment and business want some sort of stability, and then we can do that. We as a manufacturer, we're very ready to help with training. You know, millions of devices millions of devices are going to be needed. Different skills are going to be needed. That your local electrician, I have a heat exchange. It took me 3 or 4 different electricians to come to find somebody who finally understood that, because it was different. You get software and digital, all the smart devices. So I think the speed and scale will be so polarising, because it will start to get this momentum as we all want more. We want an EV or whatever, but we'll only make this happen if we really get that, be attractive to private investment, which is the point of Nina's on the report here, is we're making progress, but if you're investing, we probably wouldn't be the first country that you would choose to come to. So a combination of that is really how we've got to work it through. This has to be solved, again to Nina's point. So this is almost like the list of problems to solve as we go through there and work through them.
Thanks, Siobhan. Nina, is the renewable heat incentive distorting the market?
Well, it was an international beating incentive when it came in, although it then became quite politically mired with what happened in Northern Ireland. So straight away it got tainted. I mean, I've had to send out some stern letters on behalf of my members to the regulator, and some of those were linked with how the RHI was administered, interpreted and administered as well, which is one of the areas of conversation is how do we ensure that we have fit-for-purpose regulation of the change and the transition that we want to see. So did it distort the market? No, it kick-started the market, because when you haven't got a technology in place, it needs some investment in there, some commitment to persuade people to change. Of course, if you come now forward with a better technological solution, I tell you what, everybody will pivot towards your technology if it's cheaper. The government and the regulator and ourselves as a trade association representing manufacturers and developers of renewable technologies and clean tech, we have to be held to a good standard of responsibility and code. And people will quickly get found out if they're ripping people off. People will vote with their feet. So it is still a nascent industry. It was no accident that I said, as a trade association, we've only been around 20 years. The oil and gas sector have been how long? And we're finding areas of where things are still not perfect at all. So I think it is keep writing in, join, lobby your MP who's interested or not interested, but also pitch in your ideas, because innovation is also what we need to be happening in parallel at the same time as making sure we can deploy what we're already able to do. My last message really is on this point which is what Doug's view is, it's about the market is what the UK is proud of. We engineered the first market for power transactions with NETA back in 2002, and that brought a lot of stimuli and lack of stimuli for certain technologies. It definitely didn't in those days help with renewable energy deployment. It got a lot of gas-fired power plants on the system back then. But then we adjusted, and countries still look to the UK on how well it is doing with delivering these markets. Now, the place where we're failing is on these flexibility, deep, transparent flexibility markets that are more open and rules that more people can participate in. Technology, tech, digitalization has changed the whole landscape. It is not about a centralized generation, this is my price, take it or leave it, off you go, way of making energy security. This is about a democratization and decentralization in the way that power can flow where the market will reward it, but it has to be decarbonised as well. So we will always be beating up the regulator and beating up the grid companies, even though some of them are our members, because we have to get this market working to enable companies like Eaton and others to carry on investing in the UK.
And I think it's that market pace, that will get the speed and scale, because that will drive it. Because that's what the consumers will want. So getting that market to work well is what will get us to where we need to be quickly.
Yeah, we need to prime the pump. But if you look at the 8th carbon budget, the next 5 years are not going to be the years where we're really dishing out the heat pumps. So there is about 5 years to remove the fiscal distortions to which you refer that will make it. Most people are going to buy these heat pumps on HP on some kind of loan agreement. In order to make it attractive for people, they're going to have to remove the fiscal distortions away from gas and onto electricity. If electricity is where the green power is going to come from. So, maybe you've got 5 years to do that over time, and the government is talking about that, but it's talking about 10-something year horizons, which is too slow, right? You have to incentivise if you want the market, and then once you prime the pump with grants, which I agree are clumsy and they are distortionary in lots of places, once you've done that, then the market should drive it. It will drive down the cost of the appliances, and it will drive up the upside in installing them, right? And it will make people more prepared to make the lifestyle changes that come with running heat pumps, which are a different experience, I guess, consumer experience. And electric cars are great. They accelerate. They don't break down as much. They're actually a very easy consumer sell. They don't poison your children's lungs. Heat pumps, they're a tougher sell, right? Because they're not. We're all going to have to get used to wearing one more jumper and being a bit more strategic about when the hot water's ready. My sister's got a heat pump and it's useless. Every time more than 2 people come to stay, you have to have a sort of grid on the fridge about when it reminds me of the 1970s when I was growing up. When you could have a bath, because someone had used all the water. But I think we're going to have to get there. But removing those fiscal distortions is going to be a big chunk of it, I think.
Thank you, Peter. I just want to give our virtual audience an opportunity to come in and ask a question here. So I've got a question from another Peter. Richard, I might put this one to you. It says, lots of focus on COP26 and diplomatic positioning, but is the government focused enough on the hard grind of transitioning the UK to low carbon as opposed to spouting off buzzwords on the world stage? So I suppose what Peter's getting at here is we've heard a lot of announcements from the government, a lot of laudable targets and, coal, cash, cars and trees from Boris, but is the government actually doing enough? What do you think?
Yeah, I mean, look, I must say, actually, listening to some of my wonderful, better informed fellow panelists and experts in the audience and so on, there's a sort of slight tone of not so much doing well, could do better, but sort of we're not really doing very well. And I think that's underestimating the drive and ambition of this Prime Minister and this government. I think, we should start off by saying that the whole world has been through a pretty traumatic experience for much of the last 18 months. And any government that came in a few months before that has been necessarily focused on all sorts of other immediate crises. I think that has to be the starting point. And now, in the chair for COP26 and in the chair for G7, you can see the Prime Minister's focus swivelling round absolutely to a world of delivering on a whole series of ambitious, what your caller Patrick called buzzwords, levelling up and all the rest of it. And by the way, green energy and meeting those carbon emission targets is a very important part of levelling up. So I think we're going to see an unremitting focus on that. That's why a whole bundle of sort of Tiggerish can-do ministers have been brought in to focus on delivering that. And I think we're going to see progress that will surprise everyone. And I think it's all about actually how the private sector and the consumer find a way of working with government to deliver the results that we all want to see. So whether that's in terms of how these green grants are delivered, whether it's in terms, sir, for example, of your being able to access cheaper ground heat pumps from China, and whether you can start assembling and then manufacturing those here, so you're creating jobs as well as importing something that's cheaper, because by and large something from China always will be cheaper. So why not turn it into a great made-in-Britain product? And then it suddenly becomes much more attractive. I think there are huge opportunities there, and Peter, I think you underestimate actually my experience of government as a civil servant, as a businessman, and then now in politics. I think actually we are doing some extraordinary things all around the country that the FT is frankly not remotely aware of. I mean, whether it's the co-op you were referring to in Brighton or the Gloucester Solar Co-op or the Gloucester Green Energy Park, I don't think newspaper people sitting in London have got the slightest idea of what's going on around the country, to be blunt. And if you look at marine energy alone, I mean, there are about 30 places around the north and west coast of this country where we will make significant progress through the pot for marine energy that's coming out in AR4 in the latest contract for difference, which your paper hasn't remotely even touched on. So I think we should focus as much on the positive things that are coming forward, hold the government to account on these bold ambitions they put out there, and then everyone has to work out how best you can interact with this rather than just sort of saying the government has to do more. I mean, we all have to do more, and that starts, as Peter rightly said, you know, with our own children who do indeed spend a great deal of time lecturing any of us in our 50s or 60s about how we should be a great deal more green, and then you walk around the house turning off the lights after they've gone out and so on. So every generation can play a part in this, and I think we should just be a little bit more tigerish, a bit more bullish about the prospects ahead.
Thank you, Richard. I think I saw a couple of other hands. Was there a further question? This gentleman here.
So, Alan Pickwick, I'm a local constituency member, but I'll declare my hand. I'm a physicist with an interest in electrical engineering. So, just a couple of questions. First of all, these heat pumps generate water at about 40 Celsius, thereabouts. That's not hot enough. That's not hot enough to meet the Legionella requirement for hot water systems. 60 Celsius. Interesting point. And the other question, that's the fact, and the question for you is, are you all happy to have a heat pump screwed to your neighbour's wall with a significant fan on it, making a noise pollution in your property? Because that will be an issue. They're equivalent to the big air conditioners that you see screwed on the side of offices ad hoc. So it's not an easy game, this.
Who wants to go first on that one? Peter?
No, actually, fair enough, because I mean, my sister has one of these things, and they are noisy, and they're going to have to get quieter, I think. And they don't, when I say they don't work, they are a very different consumer experience, and that is going to be a sell. I mean, I don't want to be entirely churlish about Boris Johnson. I think what I hope is actually Boris Johnson is prepared to use his kind of political alchemy. He's a genius retail politician, but he's also a dodger of tough choices and tough things. And I hope that having set these big headline targets on cars and heat pumps and all the rest of it, he's prepared to use his retail skills, his powers of persuasion on some of the difficult bits, right? And because if he that is where the market will deliver, but the political lead, the market signals have to come from the politicians, even when there is, a political constituency running the place down. Johnson is going to have to, because he is an absolute political genius. He can move mountains. He delivered Brexit, for goodness sake. And actually, he needs to deploy all of that political whiz-bangery, as he would say, to getting us on a really sustainable path to delivering the laudable targets that he's set.
Thank you, Peter. Nina, did you want to come in response to that gentleman's comments around heat pumps?
I'd loathe to argue with a physicist, but I'm a chemist and a chemical engineer, so I'll have a go. There's some mug somewhere which says, physics. Anyway, I won't go there. Yeah, technology, you're right, there will be issues when things change and are different. Yeah, I've got friends who come along because they know who I work for, and boy, do I get all the issues, the concerns and the worries and everything. I think design will improve. The concern around health and safety is absolutely correct, and I know the Ground Source and the Air Source Heat Pump Association are really looking into all of those factors. And I think designs will get better. But my point is we keep focusing on heat pumps. There's a lot of other technologies that we can be focusing on to decarbonise. And I'm not on about hydrogen here. There's deep geothermal, which we are not tapping into. We did see our lovely Prime Minister Carlin at the Eaton project during the G7 in June, as we're tapping into that, and lo and behold, they're discovering that they found lithium there as well. So things change all the time. There are at least 5 city centres that, and I think some Conservative MPs as well linked with it, who are really wanting to promote how to think about producing that heat.
If you were here a year ago, they dug the forecourt up here. If you were here a year ago, they dug the forecourt up here for a district heating pipe system. So it's not that we're not inactive in Manchester.
No, I know, and one of our members is the people responsible who can't get the final steps through planning in order to make this really work from a deep geothermal point of view. So heat networks, yes. Deep geothermal, no. So there's all these different little barriers that the different technologies have to overcome. And the last one, obviously, the most important one, is for consumers to take this on board. I don't know how many of you in here are aware of the climate assembly that happened last year. What a fantastic activity that was, where 110 representative people from the whole of the UK who knew little or very little around about climate change, and went on the journey of understanding what it would make. You're right, the conversation has to be relevant for the people we're talking to, but at least we need people to come forward and start to listen. Most of the people in here are aware. The next bit is to get them to understand. Then the other is to have some knowledgeable people who can help them understand what their choices are, and once they make those choices, making sure that those choices are delivered well and responsibly, and then people will be happy with moving to a low carbon future. They really will. We've got great technologies now. I am 60. I mean, look at this, my iPad. My life wouldn't exist without it, but it did a few years ago. I think the whole aspect of this is to be open at this moment in time and explore. And if you've got any issues, ask, because there are people who are willing and happy to talk to people to understand what changes need to happen. Thank you.
I just add a point to that as well. I think you're right about design will change. It's changing all the time. You know, you think about your first mobile phone and where we are today with that. But what I think the other part that will drive is, you talk about your children saying, you know, giving you grief about this. I interview a lot of people, and the questions are being asked about us as an organisation right across this sustainability piece. You know, this figure's really high up on there, you know, well before they get to all the other issues. So we will be held to account, and as Nina said, this mirror we hold up, we won't have a choice. And once you get that groundswell behind you, it accelerates very, very quickly, and with the technology being developed alongside that. So I think it's really, really exciting place to be, anything to do with electricity right now. But we don't have a choice, we've got to do it. And then you've got all these other factors there, whether it's technology and innovation, or whether it's sort of what we all want from this. Bring that together, and that's a pretty powerful mix.
Is anybody going to answer the question about the noise from these things?
So I think it's a really good question. I haven't heard the noise from them, I haven't seen them in action. But I mean, I think the answer is in my terraced house, I think probably I wouldn't be mad keen on it. Yeah, so I think that's a very good question to get back to the industry and say, then, come on, guys, what are you going to do? If we're going to have these, why not?
You would need a fan to move the air through it.
But surely they're a quieter and noisier fans. I mean, there must be technological wizards who can do that sort of thing.
And everything like that.
Park them on the ground.
Yeah.
That's where mine are.
Yeah. So
When your neighbour installs one that's noisy, you'll be de-incentivised to install one. This is the danger.
No, I think the issue is technology will help us, and also
There is nothing that's going to reduce the noise of these things to zero.
no, but also the other point that I'd make, and we'll come to you, I think you also have an answer, is
There's
that
nothing that
it's
reduces the
very
noise from
important.
your neighbours to zero at the moment.
Yeah, this is the.
Can we just let Siobhan
the
finish her
importance
remarks,
of
please?
this factor, we might feel like this, but the overwhelming push that we're getting from a different demographic, this will be less important because they'll have different priorities. So I think you'll get quite a few things that will come together to help. Right now, yes, it's a problem to solve. You seem to have a solution for it already.
Well, yes, I've got 2 Dakins which are mounted on the ground, so there's no vibration. I spoke with my neighbours. They said they can't hear them when they're running. So the answer is that is not an issue unless people put the wrong... Walls take the vibration, and Therefore, the answer is ground mount them, and it resolves it.
So hard luck if you live in a flat then.
I think we've got an intra-audience debate going on now. But this question, gentleman here has a question.
Randall Heather, previously worked as an energy analyst in the financial community. And full disclosure, I'm an Eaton shareholder. What hasn't been mentioned this afternoon, and I think is the 800-pound gorilla here, is grid-level storage. We've solved the generation problem. We can get tremendous amounts of electricity from solar, from wind. We have resolved that. What we haven't solved is intermittency, which is solved by grid-level storage. It's not simply, it's hard. There's no Moore's law to battery storage. And it's not just a question of slapping on another lithium battery to another one. But if we solve the grid-level storage issue, so many of these issues go away.
Absolutely.
Where you're simply pouring into a storable thing, and whether, and I'll be interested to know, especially from Eaton, do we need 7 days of storage that we could do nationally, 14 days, 30 days, that we can go through a period like we've gone through with low wind, low sun? Suddenly it drops off. How many days do we need? But that, from an investment standpoint, we looked at this considerably in New York, that is the real problem, is batteries, whether it's from EVs or it's grid-level storage, and we haven't talked about that at all today.
Siobhan?
Yeah, sure. Well, I think grid-level storage is something that is very much under discussion at the moment, because that is part of a possible solution. I can give you another example, though, and you're right, you can't just put lots more batteries. But if we look at the trial that's being done in the Orkneys, and you have loads of wind around there, so they've got more wind than they're ever going to need. But there you've got the Orkneys, I think it's 113 or 114 individual storage units have been put in with consumers around. And you've got fuel poverty in the Orkneys as well. So all of a sudden you've got this situation where you've got a risk of curtailment. They push it all into the batteries in this very distributed energy type approach. You're paying people for this, so it helps the sort of social piece there in terms of sustainability, and then it can be pulled back. And that can be turned on, I think, in 10 seconds. It's amazing how it can be pulled up and down depending on the sort of flexibility and frequency that's required. So, yes, I think grid storage is a big topic that needs a lot more understanding and development with the battery technology as it goes. But there are solutions in the meantime which are proven very viable.
But that's local, and the issue is the nationals.
Yeah, indeed.
Nina?
Yeah, well, thanks for that question, because actually we've been working with the government on this topic in their Smart Systems and Flexibility Strategy, which came out in the summer. And the government already acknowledges that there is a role for at least 30 gigawatts of grid-scale storage to be incorporated from their view of meeting and enable to make the best out of our burgeoning offshore wind capability and solar as well. Now, and they also ran this summer it went out for tender. It was a competition for different companies to come forward with different ideas of how to do longer duration energy storage, greater than 4 hours. But I think what we haven't yet really realised is how much do we need of that longer duration when we have not yet tapped, as Siobhan was saying, how best we can leverage what we will be having going around, which is our portable battery storage, which is in our electric vehicles in the future, and how all of the systems can smartly connect up. So other technologies, that we also represent is compressed air, energy storage, gravimetric. And then, of course, everybody's very excited of hydrogen as a vector of excess. But every time you have to convert from one energy type to another, you're putting more cost onto it. It does. But I think there is a way of us looking at that stack model of what is the most viable way of delivering that energy storage system. So that work is ongoing. And I think we want the investor community to stay close and realise that there will be a market for it. So to back some innovative technologies would be the right way forward. But in the short to medium term, let's use what we've got and install more of what we understand now.
We've got time for one more question. So is there anybody in the audience? No, I think we've addressed all the questions. Well, that seems like a good note to draw things to a close on. I'll go to each of our panellists to let you deliver your brief closing remarks, and I'll ask you this question, which I always ask panels at Party Conference. What is the one policy on your policy wish list that you'd like to see from government? I will start with you, Richard.
Well, I'm tempted to go for something in the sector that I know a wee bit on and have been working with, which is marine energy. But that's quite specialist. So I think the bigger picture is probably all around the consumer. And I think we could probably all agree here that actually giving the consumer as much clarity as possible about what are the best options in order for us all to do the right thing and save a bit of money, I think would be terrific.
Nina, your closing remarks?
Well, I would probably pick that one with energy efficiency. Somebody asked me if I was a minister, what would I do in my first act as energy minister, which is to ensure everybody's homes are the castles that they've been for us during COVID-19 and make them as warm and as affordable as possible. But that's already been taken. It's the one I want to really see, and is the one that I'm really on my high horse about at the moment, is oil and gas sector stopping their fugitive emissions of methane out into the atmosphere today, now. Otherwise, why are we thinking about carbon capture and storage?
Peter, your closing remarks and your one policy you'd like to see that's on your wish list.
The policy I'd like to see is one I've been banging on about, which is about removing fiscal distortions. The tax balance is wrong on the levy balance is wrong on electricity and gas. We need to incentivise use of electricity. My closing remarks are, this is incredibly sort of exciting, and I agree with. I agree that we need tiggerishness, right? I don't want to be churlish. I think we need tiggerishness, but I think also we need a vision that's more than about buzzwords. We need to get people kind of enthused about what this world looks like, where we have smart grids, where our cars are a national battery overnight, where we're feeding locally into grids, where people feel much more connected. I'd like to see more micro-generation actually as a vector of engaging people on what is ultimately a green future that we can achieve, and we should all want that for our children, and for the rest of the planet. And therefore, it doesn't have to be an entirely adversarial thing. We don't have to be shutting down the M25 the whole time. What we need to do is get people on board with, because this, as I said right at the beginning, this conversation is only just beginning, because we've done not the easy bit, but we've done the bit behind the scenes. This is the politically harder bit, but we need to embrace it in a maximalist, tiggerish, Johnsonist way, but also with some facts thrown in.
And Siobhan.
Yes, I think the policy piece would be to drive an open and fair market, encouraging this micro-generation, because that will get private investment in this space and make it attractive. And I think my closing remarks are, whilst there's a lot for us to do, and we must continue to focus on those topics, let's appreciate what we can do right now and get on with it, because there's a lot we can do with what we have, and other countries are doing it, and we don't want to lose our leadership position.
Thank you very much. I think on that note, a round of applause for our excellent panel. Just before you leave, the shameless plug, if you're interested in becoming a member of Bright Blue, we've got a £10 special at conference, and if you're interested, you can see one of my two colleagues at the back there, and they can sign you up. Thank you very much for coming, everyone.